welcome to the Purposeful Lab, a production of Franciscan University. I'm Dr. Dan Keebler, your host, and this season on the Purposeful Lab, we're talking about the topic of transhumanism. And you can't really talk about transhumanism without talking about technology, because at the heart of, the idea of turning humans into something else lies humans' interaction with technology. And we've talked this season a little bit about genetic modifications in terms of technology and these mind-brain interfaces and AI and so forth. But today we just want to focus on just technology in general and human interaction with technology. How do we interact with technology, and how does that actually change us? And how does technological advances alter the way we interact with other people and view ourselves? So my guest today is Dr. Alex Plato. He's a professor of philosophy here at Franciscan University. He's been here 11 years. He has his PhD from the University of St. Louis. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah.
Glad to talk about the subject.
Yeah, no, this is great. We sat down a couple of days ago and just sort of getting some ideas out, and I was like, we could go on for days on this stuff. It's very, very interesting to get down a lot of very interesting things about how humans are interacting with technology and how that's changing every day. So, I know that you have taught some courses in the philosophy of technology. We'll get into that in a minute. But before we get to that, just maybe you could introduce yourself to the listeners. What got you interested in philosophy?
Sure.
And what got you on a direction of moving to Franciscan?
Yeah, no, I think what really sparked my interest in philosophy was I was raised a kind of liberal Christian. And then my mom went to a really conservative Baptist church. And one of my teachers there, who was also one of my science teachers, was a really strong creationist.
Okay.
And I got into the creation evolution debate, and my dad was an evolutionist. He's never been a practicing Christian. And so I got into all these debates with my dad, and I realized that there were lots of more fundamental, I didn't know what they were then, but philosophical issues beneath how we're interpreting evidence. So we might have archaeopteryx right there.
Yeah.
He's seeing this as obvious, proof for evolution. I'm not necessarily, right? Because here's this assumption. And then I realized that debate is, as you know, kind of an unnecessary warfare going on there. So then I realized those issues are what I'm really interested in underneath. Does God exist? What is God like? And that got me into other issues like the nature of knowledge and evidence. So it was kind of apologetics got me interested. And that got me interested in philosophy first. And then when I was in my undergraduate work, I actually entered in as a music education major.
Okay.
I wanted to teach because since 7th grade, I really wanted to teach. But I thought, when I was in that program, I don't just want to be directing bands and choirs. I want to talk about issues. And so then I changed my major to interdisciplinary studies and got on a beeline to go to a master's program in philosophy, which was at Biola University.
Okay.
And it was just a terminal degree. And then I went to St. Louis University after that. So that's kind of how I got into philosophy. But
yeah. What got you? So when you come to Franciscan, everybody, when you teach here, you teach a range of courses. You got to teach your introductory courses and so forth. But then a lot of times you get to pick develop upper level courses, and you decided to develop upper level course in philosophy of technology.
Yeah.
So what drew you into that space?
I'd say really two things. So I got involved with some of my friends here who are part of a Catholic think tank called New Polity. And they were really interested in technology things, and I kind of had already been a little bit interested. My brother, I have a twin brother who's a teacher in a Chesterton Academy back in Oregon.
Right.
And he had read this book by Neil Postman called Technopoly, and he'd always told me, this is a great book. Right? It was on my list of millions of books that I never get to.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a great term, Technopoly.
Yeah, Technopoly. It is a great name.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really nice word. And so I thought, I'm teaching philosophy of the human person, which is a core class. And I thought, I'm going to check this out. I'm going to see if this has something that I can use.
Yeah.
And I just loved the book. I just thought he was such a clear writer. I thought he gave a lot of history, a lot of philosophical content, but it was written for, a popular audience that's intellectual.
Right.
So it was perfect for students. And then that got me really fascinated. Then I started following up some of the footnotes and other people there. And then eventually I got to the point where this was a major topic of interest of mine. And then the Catholic Studies program here, at that time, Dr. Jones was running it. And he said, would you like to make a course for me? I said, I'd love to make one called Technology and Society. He said, go for it.
Yeah.
And so I made that course, and I've taught it many times. And then I've subsequently, done some guest lectures with people. I've had some interviews about this. And actually the transcripts from that class I want to make into a book. So that's kind of my plan with it. And I just loved it. And I think it's such a fascinating and important area that it's hard for a lot of people to hear, I think, because when I got into the philosophy of technology, a lot of the philosophers of technology are kind of, a lot of them are kind of doomsayers, you know? And so they're saying things that sound unbelievable. Like they're saying this stuff before there was the internet. Like Neil Postman is before the internet.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet he's saying that we have this state of mind and this state of culture in which technology is dominating our mentality and our habits.
Yeah.
And then we get the internet, then we get smartphones, and then we're going AI now. And it's like, obviously the transhumanist trajectory was there from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So I'm much more, I'd say I'm interested in the topic because I'm interested in like social theory, like how our society has changed through time, and going from a kind of where Christendom was this sort of, all of Western civilization was Christendom basically, and then we kind of broke it apart at the Reformation. And how did that happen? What caused that? What's that doing? So I have a bigger question that it's part of that I'm interested in.
Yeah. How technology or how society changes over time, and what's driving
civilization really itself. Our whole civilization has shifted in certain ways, good, certain ways bad.
Yeah. So the transhumanism is largely, I mean, transhumanist thoughts have been around forever, right? So it's not something that necessarily is associated with technology.
Yes.
It needs technology to be able to do what it sort of wants to do.
Right.
But these transhumanist ideas predate, sort of the technological advances that we've seen in the last 50 years. But there is this reliance now in sort of the modern transhumanist movement is that technology is going to fix all of our problems. Like that we've got these defects, we've got these weaknesses, we've got these things that
we die.
We're exactly. It's crazy. We got to fix that. We got to fix that's number one.
That Zoltan Istvan guy that was the political candidate for a transhumanist thing, he says explicitly on his interview, our number one goal is to defeat death. He just says that's the goal. We all have friends die, we have relatives die. Like we want to solve that problem.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Sort of an aside, like this in biology nowadays, there's all of this sort of longevity research. It's really sort of taking off, and it's really downstream of this transhumanist idea that death is a problem and we can fix it. Aging is a problem. It's like, how do we stop human aging? And it's all part of this. Death is a problem. We've got to fix it. And it's sort of like coming up with a technological solution for death is it's opposed to the Christological solution.
That's right. No, I think.
Death,
I think one of the key lessons I learned from my study of the philosophy of technology is actually theological. Right.
Yeah.
Is that there's a view about the nature of man and his destiny that's at stake, obviously.
Yeah.
And so if God and he's the highest good, and that's part of our destiny is to achieve what's highest and best for us, which is union with God, right? Then the transhumanist project, which proposes a different end, right, is going to be a very different theology. And so it presupposes a different theology. And I think it really does. It in a certain way, it attacks the heart of Christianity of the incarnation. Like Christ is embodied flesh, right? He has a body just like us, right? Of course, he had a soul like us as well. And that element, I think, is attacked as mechanization and digitization and all that is sort of trying to replace these problematic elements, right? Which are not problematic. These are part of God's creation.
Yeah, it is very much. It's interesting because it's almost dualistic, right? In their nature, because it's totally anti-incarnational.
Yes.
It's like the body is the problem, right? And I need to fix it somehow. Download myself onto a computer or whatever. That is evil, and the real me is going to be able to exist out here in
digital space,
civil space, and that's where I am. Of the body, we see them. Yeah. People, I think the transgenderism is sort of the same boat. It's like the body is the problem. And I think that's at the root of this transhumanism idea.
I think that's right. And I think that studying the philosophy of technology made me realize that like the fertile ground for transhumanism to be like a movement with, like, as this guy said, like millions of people, right, are interested in this idea, right? For that to be acceptable, right, and for that to be taken seriously requires, yes, technological development, but it requires a whole milieu in which we already exist, where technology is already deified. We've already surrendered to it. We've already looked through all the problems. The problems it creates, we get it more to fix it, right? And it's this sort of self-augmenting system, right? And it seems almost irreversible to me, right? Which always raises the question with my students is, so if it is a big problem, like our sort of being dominated by technology in our culture and in our minds, like how do we get out of that? That's a big question.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll address that at some point.
Yeah. So just standing back and looking at technology, and that's part and parcel of what we are as humans. We invent things. We invent antibiotics. We invent aqueducts. Things. Like technology is part and parcel of the human
man, the maker.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So there is something about us that we are here to sort of learn how to flourish, and technology could be part of that, right?
Yes.
So. It's not inherently an evil thing,
right.
But the question that what is the question that really from philosophy of technology gets at the heart of the problem, because it's not that humans shouldn't be doing any technology that's not human. No, that's part of who we are, right?
That's right. No, so I think it's how does our development and use of tools and machines, and now obviously the internet and data, how does that affect how we relate to each other, how we relate to nature or creation, and how we relate to God? Because we're part of this entire world, and we're in those interrelationships, whether we like it or not. That's part of our nature, right? The place we are, environment. And so I think what it does is it disturbs those connections. And I really like Neil Postman's definition of technopoly, and I want to read that because it captures it.
No, I love that term. So
So this is what he says. Again, a 1992 book. Technopoly says, technopoly is a state of culture. It's also a state of mind. It consists in the deification of technology, which means that the culture seeks its authorization in technology, finds its satisfactions in technology, and takes its orders from technology. This requires the development of a new kind of social order, and of necessity leads to the rapid dissolution of much that is associated with traditional beliefs.
Okay.
So my class that I made for Dr. Jones is called Technology and Society. And one of the greatest philosophers of technology was Martin Heidegger. And he has probably the most famous essay in the material on the subject, called The Question Concerning Technology. And like all the other philosophers of technology, even that disagree amongst themselves, they all see that what happens when we develop this mentality, this state of mind or state of culture, is that we ourselves become the subject of technological innovations. We start messing with ourselves and our society, right? And we saw this way before there was advanced technologies, all the way back in the modern period, like in the 1700s, even back to 1650 with Bacon and Descartes, right? They're saying that knowledge itself, human knowledge, has a new purpose. So the purpose isn't to contemplate higher things that are intrinsically valuable, that lead us to God and prayer, right? And deeper relationships with each other in nature, but rather, like Descartes said, is we want to get to know all the elements of the world like a cobbler knows how to make shoes. Because then we can make anything for our purposes. We can manipulate nature for our purposes with no end. And he says this overtly in 1637, right? He says we can basically create perfect material conditions, right? We can eliminate disease. We can create lots of gizmos and devices. He even uses that term, right? Devices, right? And we can achieve, he said, the number one fundamental good. This is where as a philosopher, like my alarm clock's going off, because I'm thinking like God, like fellowship with humans, friendship, like some great good, health. That's what he says is the fundamental good that we'll now be able to achieve. That was 1637. You go up 100 years, you got something like Condorcet, right? He's saying basically we're going to eliminate all diseases. We're going to eliminate social problems. We're going to eliminate the class conflict. We're going to literally, he says, build heaven on earth.
Right.
So that's back to that theological thing. There's an attempt, I think, for man to say, look, we've got problems, and one of them is death, right? But there's also disease, and there's misunderstanding and ignorance and all this. And if we just have the right science and technology, the right knowledge, then we'll be able to solve the human enigma by ourselves, which is, to me, in theological terms, mean we'll resolve original sin, and we will save ourselves, and we will create our own heaven. Right. So there's this.
It's a utopian.
I think, it's a utopian. It's a demonic control, right, of our destiny. It's not willing to participate in a greater destiny.
So it's not only the end is wrong, but the means. Like the ends, like Christ is going to transform us, right? Like
that's right.
But now it's and we can become deified. That's Catholic.
That's
teaching,
amazing.
Catholic understanding that we are going to be
And
deified,
his power does
and His
that.
power does
we
that.
can never have that power.
Right. So now we want to be deified, and it's on our terms and our power, and we're
Yes.
going to do that. And it's
Yes.
interesting. Yeah, back in the 1600s, saying like disease,
been
health,
prepared for.
and that's why we've gotten in modern
Earthly
times.
goods, not transcendent
Transcendent
goods. So
goods,
one of my lessons I teach is that technopoly, and it doesn't mean technology, technopoly, the state of mind and the state of
Yeah,
culture,
yeah.
right? That he says replaces traditional beliefs, traditional values, and I think ultimately not just moral values, right? Because you can see the transhumanist, ethic is not there, really,
Right,
but what it does is it cuts us off from the transcendent, the mysterious, the reality that we know is beyond, that has always motivated real scientists, right? The wonder of the
Right,
world,
yeah.
the wonder of these things that work this way that we didn't make, that have like
Exactly.
fingerprints of some divinity
Right.
behind it. And that, I think, is cut off, right? Becomes, as Pope Francis said in Laudato Si, which is a great encyclical for this issue, especially chapters 2 and 3, I think he's really getting to the heart of it, right? Is that this project is an attempt, right, to control and to master and to treat as mere stuff, physical reality.
Right,
Whereas physical reality, we know, right, from hiking around in nature and looking at a sunset, even if we have like our favorite tree in our front yard, like if that's gone, you can't replace it. Like material stuff is actually important, right? Like as if it's made by a creator,
Yeah, no, that's interesting because you see that in science as it's become more technologically and industrially driven in the last 50 years. So, and I still think there's plenty of scientists that like they see the handiwork of God and what they're doing, and that sense of awe and wonder of what they're studying. That's not like it's gone.
No.
But I think it's starting
Real
to
science survives.
Right. But there is so much more about how can I commercialize what I'm working on. I remember in like my PhD, when we were in grad school, they kept telling us, "Oh, if there's anything that you can commercialize, let us know. We can make some money off." And it's sort of this profit, materialism, technology. What can we do with this technology, and how can we, that is a dimension of science and science training now. And it's interesting, and the ethics that we get trained in is not ethics of, how to do the moral just thing in science. The ethics are like, how do you, handle intellectual property properly? So
exactly.
it's totally turned upside down
I completely agree.
in a lot. But
I think so.
Yeah. What is we look at, say, the last 50 years of technological advances.
Yeah.
What do you see that as sort of doing to the human person, and why is that happening? Why is the human person being so affected by technology, say in the last 50 years? In a way that we weren't necessarily. I mean, we've always been affected by technology, but in a way that seems to be on a different order of magnitude.
Yeah, I think it is a different order of magnitude. I like Postman gives a nice, really brief history.
Yeah.
Right. He talks about in our Western civilization, right, we've got sort of three phases, he notes, which is the first one he calls a tool-using culture, where the worldview, which has a certain end and destiny and view of mankind, is controlling which tools we make and how we use it. Like, for example, in the Middle Ages, the crossbow was like disallowed because it was an inhumane weapon.
Okay.
Right? It's like, so then obviously the ethical worldview is like putting a kind of constraint on what technologies are allowed to be used. And then that transitions to what he calls technocracy, right? Which is the Baconian Cartesian project, right? And then that goes for a while, and then he thinks it transitions to what he calls technopoly, when he thinks that first comes to America in the early 1900s. Now, other philosophers of technology might say that it happened earlier in Europe, right? I would probably go that route, right? Probably like the 1800s. But my point is you have these three different phases, and the worldview is supposed to control, right? But then the worldview lets up and it doesn't control anymore. So I think that kind of helps me sort of lay out the sort of order in which to think about technologies and how they operate. So I think that even the last 50 years you mentioned it's already transitioned in a major way before that.
Yeah.
And so Postman, what he does, which I really like, is he focuses on the information revolutions. So he talks about the printing press, right?
Okay.
Now, that obviously revolutionized Europe, and it was part of the Reformation. Everything, there's lots of books written about it. It's a very accepted thesis. right? But we had like 200 years to adjust to that technology, our society, our way of living. Because when you introduce a technology, it isn't just that you're introducing a tool that does something. You're introducing a thing that now changes how we relate to each other, right? And so you always change society. So what Postman uses the concept of if you introduce a caterpillar into an environment that doesn't have this caterpillar, you don't just have that old environment plus a caterpillar. You have a new ecosystem because it changes all the interrelationships.
Yeah.
And so every technology, therefore, is not neutral to society. It always changes society for good and bad and some mixture. And unfortunately, we don't know ahead of time what that's going to be necessarily. But we had 200 years to adjust to the printing press. But then we eventually, when we get up to, let's say, the 1800s, the end of the 1800s, we get like the phonograph and the telegraph, and then we get eventually we get radio, and we get the TV, and then we get computers, and then we get the internet, and then we get smartphones, and then we get AI. It's like it's coming so fast, we can't adjust ourselves to it. So literally, it is forming how we do society, just like he said in the quote.
Yeah.
It's forming a new social order. So my biggest worry is that the way in which we interact with each other as social beings is altered. And we know that with a lot of studies with smartphones and kids and all this stuff happening. They're unable to engage in normal relationships again. Like they want to talk to AI robots, like all this stuff that is just, to me, destroys society. Like social media is antisocial. You know, it's not achieving what it said it achieves. And it's related to, like you said earlier, it's related to our form of society, which we have a technocratic capitalistic form of society. Right? Capitalist values are good, like creativity, entrepreneurship, right? Business creativity, that's all good. But we've developed it in a habit in such a way that that profit motive or the money, right? Or that sort of dominates our better motives.
Right.
And so I think that's where you see the technology reaching out and touching us. Like it's got a profile of me. It like knows who I am by a set of data, right? And it incites desires from me. It doesn't just solicit desires, it creates them in me. So it's making me into a market, right? And of course, we don't want that to happen. We don't want to sell people. That's called slavery, you know? So that's the sort of trajectory that I see the last phase where we have now, where the technology, we carry it around with us everywhere, and it's hearing us, and it's keeping track of information, and that information is going who knows where. And most of us don't care, right?
Yeah.
So it's close to us, literally, our desires, our heart, our choices.
Yeah. So how is that, like, that information, like, affecting the way society is organized, right? Because what comes first is the technology, because it seems like it's the technology driving the change in society, or is the change in society lack of sort of seeing transcendental ends, allowing technology to do things that it otherwise wouldn't, because we'd have barriers or blocks, like you're talking about the crossbow. That's an inhumane way. We're not going to do that. So it seems like it's a chicken or an egg thing here.
Exactly. It's the question of how much are our choices our freedom? What is the extent of our freedom with respect to our cultural upbringing? So obviously the determinist is going to say something like, whatever your culture is determines what you do, and you're not really free. Like Marx is a famous kind of view of this view. Right. But then, of course, as Christians, we believe that our free will hasn't been destroyed. Right. Of course, we can't save ourselves, so we need help. Right. We need our will to be directed the right way. Right. And then God saves us not against our free will, but with it. And so we think there's still a freedom left. But I do think that social theory shows that to a large degree we are heavily influenced, right, much more than we even want to admit, by our upbringing, by our culture, by the language we use, by the options that are put before us. And so I think that there's a real force to be reckoned with at a social level in terms of how do we filter or interpret the huge amounts of information that are being put out everywhere through not just TV or radio from before, but now internet and smartphones. There's an information glut. That's what Postman calls it. And so we used to have in society methods or gatekeepers for that information. That's obviously like family, government, law courts, churches. Like these would be part of filtering what information is relevant and which is irrelevant, which matters and which doesn't. But as the information's flooding and it breaks down those defense mechanisms, and then that's technology creating a problem. And so now we need more technology to solve the problem. And Postman mentions that those are experts, new like classes of experts, bureaucracy, and more machines. Yeah. And so that's now how we control information is with more technology. So it's like sort of like battening down the hatch even more. And so it feels, like I said at the beginning, it feels like there's no way to get out of this problem. But I do think on an individual level, we always have freedom, right? We always have, somebody can always say no and just not do something. They can refrain from doing what they're doing. Now, it's hard to get that motive, right? But it's there, and God's breaking in, and friendship breaks in, and we all have had those experiences, right? Where something shocking happens, death, love, some amazing experience, and now we're like on a different track. And psychologists study this. There can even be one act habit formation, where you just suddenly have an about face.
Right, yeah.
And so that always can happen. So I think at an individual level, there always is freedom. If you're doing social analysis and looking at big trends over hundreds of years, it looks like everything looks inevitable.
Right. Yeah. That particularly like smartphones, right?
Yes.
So this technology you're talking about, with all this information being available, and that we can't really filter it. So our kids are reading this, or a political view, or not, or social view. Whereas before, it was very much limited.
We could go to the library. We talked about that the first time we talked. I used to go to the library by habit. I would know the sections. I would explore them. I would discover things. And of course, it's like a trustworthy filter of information. But now you got the internet. Like, I'm scared to let my kid on the internet.
Right.
Like, I don't know what's going to pop up.
Yeah. And people talk about, this is the democratization of information. Now it's all available. Nobody's control. So they come at it almost like from the other side. Like, it used to be that information was controlled by the evil Catholic Church and by all these other
censors.
Right, keeping you from reading things. And now we can actually read the truth out there. And so, and it's created a different problem, is that nobody knows what the truth is. Right.
And we're still the same humans, right? And so, like, all the philosophers from ancient times, both Eastern and Western traditions, like, they have all noticed the same problem, which the church actually goes a little bit deeper, but it is the same problem, is mankind will always be driven down to the lower passions unless he forms self-discipline, self-control, and virtue formation by effort, right? But of course, the church says there's no amount of effort that you're going to get that's ever going to perfect your nature, right? So you have to depend on forces beyond your control. And of course, that is the seed of religion in every culture. And so we call it original sin and concupiscence as Catholics. But the philosophers are just saying that's the passions driving us always down to the lowest denominator. And when we look at the internet, I think we want cheap information, we want quick information, we want effective information. We don't think about the values, a stake that we're missing by. Maybe if you went to the library and you spent extra time and patience, you drove there, maybe you'd get higher quality information that would actually make you a better person to go through a slower, more patient process.
No, you just, there's like a physical nature of like picking up a book and and opening it and seeing another book next to it. And there's serendipitous things of like, I just happened to
we're profoundly bodily. I think that's something I love about the church's recent teaching, right, in the last 100 years, is that there is a theology of the body. There is a meaning to our actual flesh and our actual, symmetry, right? Like, you can't reproduce this in without having a 3D space, like that my hands are opposite, and so, like, that is inherently meaningful, my flesh. And when we remember based on physical, like, proprioceptive interaction with our environment. So when I have all my files on my computer, I can't remember as much. I forget more things now. Versus my old books that have my notes in the margins. I can picture the page and, like, remember what I wrote right there.
There's a physical thing
there. There's a physical memory going on.
I just know I got all my PDFs about that topic over there. If I need to, I'll go look at it, but I can't remember what they're organized and where I actually put it. So, no. I mean, you mentioned something about the bureaucracy as shaping our worldview and as a technology. It's like, how is, because nobody, I don't think normally people think of, your bureaucracy, your government setup is a technology.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the most important and interesting things that philosophers acknowledge, usually do it on page 1, is they talk about the word technology. Right? Of course, that's a sort of weird, like, Greek techne and Latin ology, like, slammed together. Right? It sounds like biology, like it's the study of techne. Right? But what techne is making things. And so one philosopher I like named George Grant, a philosopher of technology, talks about how in our modern era, making and knowing, or science and making, have been brought together, right? And so that's sort of the anti-contemplative element, right? And so we make the knowledge that we want, so to speak. We invent, and Bacon says that explicitly, right? We invent this knowledge that we need, that we want. And so now you have this unique co-penetration, right, of making and science. And so technology as a word shows you that, because there's the ology part, which seems like reflective, sort of theoretical, the system of, and then techne, which is making whatever, anything, right? And you slam those together and you have this word technology. And then, of course, when we use the word technology now, we tend to think of a product,
Yeah, right.
like the phone is a technology, right? But maybe a better word, like the French philosopher Jacques Ellul is a philosopher of technology, and he wanted to translate his title into English, the technicized society, but the English translators made it the technological society.
Okay.
And so technique is related. So a technique is something we invent in order to make, control, or do something efficiently or effectively. So
a
any
bureaucracy.
so a factory system is a technology.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
A factory is a technology. Bureaucracy is a technology. Anything that we make as a system to try to make something more effective or efficient, that we invent the process or the method, that's a technology.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of what Postman calls invisible technologies. In fact, he even goes down to the point of saying language is a technology. Right. We manipulate words in a certain way, and we know this from the communistic era, right? Like manipulating words on purpose is a way to try to change the way people think. It's a technique, right? For changing. Propaganda is a technique. And so yes, bureaucracy is a technique for trying to deal with organizational and logistical problems when things get so big you can't just rely on personal decisions.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a necessity to organization. Obviously, a military needs that when it's really big. But when it comes to dominate the personal and take the place of the personal and the creative, well, then you see it's actually going against humanity and against human values.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So when you talk about the technology, or so the smartphone and so forth, how that changes our relationship with each other and with the environment.
Yes.
And I think that's an important thing to hit upon, our natural world. How does, so you can draw that out a little bit about how that alters our relationship, not only with other people, because I think people see that more so, but how does it alter our relationship with the environment? And how is that a problem?
So a simple way into it, I think, is to realize that, like, when we think of a product like a smartphone, like that's the product of literally like hundreds, more than 100 types of materials and little other things that are made in some other country, like with international agreements. And in other words, there's a history to this thing, and the history of it is part of it. And I think that's what philosophy of technology taught me, is like we just see the smartphone and it's just right in front of it. It's a tool. It's like a hammer.
Right.
It's a little bit more complex than a hammer. Right. It's got a much deeper history, and there's processes involved in making the parts and making the material for making the parts. And so then you start to see, well, those parts themselves were made by certain technologies, right? And they were transported using other technologies. And now you start to see this whole ensemble through the backlog of history of all these technologies are related to each other to create this whole milieu, this like technium that things exist in. So the smartphone's like a tip of an iceberg. And so how does it affect nature? Well, what materials were required to make that? And what materials were required to make that part? And so on and so forth. And how did that change our environment? Well, Heidegger, right, when he wrote his essay in mid-century, 20th century, he said, well, let's compare a windmill and coal mining, right? And mining, I think, is a really great concept, because that, as we know, radically can change the natural landscape around us. Not only that, can radically change humans, right, in a very detrimental way. It's a very harsh process, right, versus a windmill, which is sort of like working with nature. So Heidegger then says, well, what's the difference between these two like paradigm examples of technologies or tools? He says the mining is trying to extract and store energy from nature for possible uses later. So he has a word that's called standing reserve. It means like, I want to create capital and I want to store it here for future use, versus the windmill, right? You can do that to a minor degree, right? But it's basically using it as it's happening, right? And so you're not exhausting nature, you're working with nature. So I think that's one way to get into it, is the processes that we use to make things and the materials that we get might challenge nature, go against nature, or set upon nature. These are Heidegger's terms. Rather than work with nature and harmonize with nature and reveal nature's potencies. Like I talked to our colleague Jeff Rohde, right? And he's a chemist, and he was talking about like a little bond that he discovered. Right, he didn't put it in there. He didn't make it in there. It was like a tiny thing, and he discovered. He's like, "Wow, this is like Jesus put that there. Like it was already there," and he was like in awe about it. Right, and then you're like using what nature already gives, right, and then you're trying to purify it by technical processes which help it. You're just like taking what nature had already, right, and you're not sort of transforming right, the landscape and the nature, and using human labor in bad ways, like with mining is famous.
Yeah. So not necessarily something wrong with necessarily transforming nature in a certain way, but it is often we don't see all of the
Technology
consequence
hides its history.
hides its history.
It has a self-cloaking device.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, every time we think about any individual technology or tool, we need to think, what's the history? That's the question to ask as a philosopher. How did I get that? Where did it come from?
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and it's interesting because you were talking about bureaucracies as the technology, and that's embedded in the smartphone because the bureaucracies that are making trade deals and so forth, so that we can get this mineral from this country to make this right, and so it's not just the natural world, but it goes into the governments and governmental structures and so forth.
It's almost like we more often than not live in a technical made environment.
Yeah.
Like we don't, like, we're born in a technical environment. We're going to die inside a building. We spend all of our time inside. We have artificial lights. Like we get in our car. Like we're almost always inside of some technology, you know, and that's not necessarily intrinsically bad. But the point is it gets to be unnatural. The proportionality of it's clearly unnatural now. People can't just appreciate being outside, right? It's got to be a certain temperature, air conditioned or heated. You know,
and it masks what the effects of technology might have on the outside if you never encounter the outside world, right? If you never look at nature and go see what you lose the appreciation of, hey, what are we doing to that with this technology?
I think you lose that, and you lose even more, like we said earlier, is like you lose an opportunity or a connection to the divine, like to God's world and God, like to the transcendent mystery breaking in. And you changing your life because of it. That's happened to so many people in history, right? Poets try to capture that moment, you know, and you're cutting yourself off from that moment and creating and exchanging a purely human-made, entertaining environment, right, for those greater goods.
Yeah, and that's true. And then we're also, like with the smartphone technology, exchanging real face-to-face interactions with real embodied people. Yeah. For either a chat with something that isn't human or even a chat with a human, right? And so, again, getting back to that embodiment, is that we're isolating, so we can communicate with people on these devices. Yes. But I'm not actually looking you in the eye. Right. And what do you lose?
Right. No. Right. It's true. You lose the freedom and the mystery of that person's body moving in the way it does in an environment that's natural to you. Yeah. Right. As a being with senses.
Yeah. No, my wife always tells me this, like 90% of conversation is nonverbal, right? And I missed most of those.
Yeah, all the body
cues.
Language. Yeah.
but that is something about being with somebody in the same physical space. Yeah. There's something about that leads to a different type of conversation, a different type of interaction that we often we don't. It almost becomes transactional when you're just words and words and putting words in back rather than
interpersonal, rather than communion. Yeah. Right. It's just an exchange. Right. As a communion thing, it's like we build something greater because we're together, greater than both of us. Yeah. Right. I think that's ultimately what human society is. It's for a common good, which is something that we all share, and then it completes us individually. But it's all greater than we could achieve by ourselves. Yeah. Right. So the way to achieve human perfection is in society. We're social beings. We're meant to be in communion, and I think that is challenged by our technocratic, technopolistic way of life. Sure. And when I look at history, I see, like I mentioned, the 1800s, and I think that in that time period you have the sort of self-regulating market model of Adam Smith, which has ingenious elements, obviously about creating wealth, and we've done it more than any society ever has by far. Yeah. Because that's what we've wanted, and so we've achieved it, right? Yeah. But what have we lost, right? I mean, look at the number of suicides in our time before we had this sort of mentality, right? Now that's mental health issues, you know, so there's something we're missing too, right? But that self-regulating market model, which Smith wanted for England, was taken by some of the elites of Europe and applied to Europe as a whole. And so they tried to make Europe an international market, and to do that, they had to create an international financial market, right? And so they did that to then imply this model. They literally implemented a rational idea, a model that was in a book, right, and tried to make it happen. That's not natural to human society. They imposed it. Yeah. So a thinker I really like said that laissez-faire capitalism was planned. It's the opposite of what we think.
What you think. Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
planning, which is like the response by the socialists of all different sorts, not just communists, was a response. It wasn't planned. Planning was like a reaction.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a major turning point where we had been living on our Christian capital, so to speak, our cultural capital. And then I think we switched gears in the 1800s, and we have the international nation building project, and it's like huge colonization all over the world, and like tons of economic resources and huge military buildups. And then what happens? Devastation, World War I, right? And then it happens, then totalitarianism, it gets even worse. And then World War II, right? And now it feels like we're getting near to World War III. It feels like now what happened in Europe in that 1800s in an international European is like happening on the globe.
All throughout the globe, yeah.
Right? And it feels eerily the same to me. It's like we've just accelerated, right? And 1800s is often called by historians the age of ideology. And to me, ideology is like a technocratic philosophy, right? It's like these ideas will help us do what we want. It's not because they're true. It's what they're doing.
They get us to a goal.
They get us to a goal of what we want. And so now that ideology has replaced Christianity as the fundamental worldview. So I think, as the Vatican Council told us, like we are living in an era that's like the early Christians in Rome. Like we are a missionary body within a broader pagan whole. We become post-Christian. That's what Lewis calls it. Yeah. And so we've lost our roots. We've lost the traditional values Postman's talking about, who was like a humanistic Jew. Like he cared about losing the biblical wisdom and that kind of thing. But like I think it's a bigger problem. We're losing our Christian faith. Right, and sure, there's pockets that are retaining it, and to me, that's the ultimate cost of this change that I see really took a major turning point in the 1800s, and then the modern state becomes the modern bureaucratic administrative state, and it's really hard. That to me is an obvious technique. Yeah. So now we have this like global market system and the bureaucratic state. Right, and these are like themselves are technologies that are dominating in certain ways.
And those are what are going to fix. We have all these problems like globally and so forth, but what's going to fix it? International Monetary Fund, or you have another
new technology.
Yeah.
As opposed to human beings like loving each other and being virtuous and going to schools for kids or homeschooling, whatever you do to like train up kids from 0 to 10 to be like good people. Like those habits are like that's what's going to transform society. Yeah. And that's what, of course, lots of people we're blessed to have in our community with Catholics are doing that. Yeah. Right? There's other communities too that are doing, but that's not a technique. That's not a technical problem. That's a human problem.
Human problem. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's interesting, like because you do see like all these technological the fallout of technology, loneliness,
mental health
issues. And then they look, what's the technological solution, right? And that's what we're looking for, right? Oh, well, here's a drug that we can take. Well, here's an app that you can use that can help you with that. So it's all technological solutions. It's like we have a problem. We see this at colleges. Okay, well, people are using AI to write their essays. Well, here's a solution, a technological solution that can detect AI use. It's like it's one after another, and it's not going to necessarily get to the fundamental problem of we're relying on technology to
and we
fix
don't need to.
Things.
Think about like I'm glad that Hallow exists in one sense, right? It helps a lot of people, but to me, sometimes we often think that something that's helpful because it's better than what would have been, right, is therefore like the best, right, or therefore necessarily like really good. Well, it's remedial. To me, Hallow's remedial. That's its function, right? For people that are already addicted to the phone and they need to try to help to get off it, right? It might help them to pray and get off it. Yeah. And so I recently went with my son and watched the Carlo Acutis movie and documentary. And it very much had a lot of these lessons from philosophy of technology. And then, of course, he's a saint for our times, right? Because he set disciplinary measures himself of his own free will, out of his devotion to Christ and the Eucharist, right? He's able to have the wherewithal to, like, I'm only going to play video games an hour a week or whatever. Right? But then there were some philosophers reflecting on it. They said, look, if you use technology in a way that helps you get off technology, then that's a good use of technology. Yeah. And technology here, I mean like smartphones and computers, right? Yeah. So that I think is a good measure. There's uses for things, right? Yeah. But our question as philosophers is not how do we use the tool, but like what has this done to society? That's the big question, I think.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think you read about there's a loneliness epidemic. Well, we can have these chat bots to talk to people, right? Yes. And these people, it's better than being lonely. They can at least talk to a robot or talk to a chatbot, and so that can be a benefit to them. Yeah. So again, looking at technological. So what's the problem with that? Say, hey, this technology is addressing a need, even though that need was created by technology.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great kind of thought experiment about that. You know, it might be better than not. Let's just accept that for argument's sake for a minute. That it is better than not. Because it might
I don't know.
It might not be. But let's accept that for argument's sake. But just because it's better than them being lonely doesn't mean it's actually like good. It just might be less evil.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's suppose it is less evil. Well, what would make it evil at all? Well, you know, the way in which we interact, like in the 1990s, I can't remember what it was, mirror neurons were discovered.
Oh yeah.
Right? Yeah, I'm sure you know all about this. And the whole story is fascinating how they're discovered. But like,
can you just explain what a mirror neuron is?
So mirror neurons is when let's say, you know, Dr. Keebler does something here, right? And I'm watching him do it. My brain gets into a state that his brain was in to do that thing.
Yeah.
So they observed it with monkeys, like the monkeys eating raisins, and the monkey that was watching the raisins being eaten, the exact same neural network, like identical. And so they're mirroring the neurons of the other one. And so we're designed by our brains and our bodies, right, to be in communion with other people. And like, if you just have a chatbot, that's literally impossible.
Right.
It's not even, and then what is the cost of that? If it is impossible, what you're doing is like what you do when you go on a bad date. Right? You go on a date with a girl and you only spend time exclusively face to face. You never observe her behavior in other settings with her friends, right? And her parents, right? And among animals and children and out in you're just like face to face. And so what you do is like you both present some false self to each other, right? And then you create this false image of yourself. So it seems like that's the danger of chatting with this thing, is you're going to create like an image of yourself that you want this thing to help you with. And rather than actually helping you be authentic, it might actually be preventing you from being authentic. It might make it impossible.
Right. Yeah.
These things are true about our embodied interpersonal reactions.
Right. Yeah. And it's also not, I think it's like a lot of these chatbots or AI things are designed to make you feel good and to empathize with you and be on your side, to rather than, a lot of times when you talk to someone that loves you, they challenge you and they tell you, you know what, Alex, you're being a jerk right now. Or like, you can't say it. It's like, that's uncomfortable for us, but that's actually part of me becoming who I'm meant to be.
Absolutely.
Right?
That goes back to our freedom. Like our freedom happens together. That's what's weird. With friendships especially, like as you're confronted with something where your passions are controlling you, then your friend holds up the mirror and says, this is you. This is the pattern of you.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my gosh. And then you have to have a decision point, and now you're really free.
Yeah.
You know,
and technology really can mask that in many, many ways, because it's like we don't put down the phone and think about what's going on a lot of the time. So we don't actually self-reflect as much as we should, or as we would, or we previously did.
Absolutely. I think life becomes a rush where the only goods are goods that we make, or goods that are practical goods, as opposed to, no, there's such a thing as contemplation. There's such a thing as intuition. Like Joseph Pieper, I love that philosopher, the mid-century Thomistic Catholic philosopher. And he talks about our society is based on contemplative habits. He calls it leisure in the old school sense of the word leisure, right? Leisure is the basis of culture. Contemplating higher goods is what is the foundation of Western civilization. How is that? Well, because when you reflect on things that are ultimately valuable, God, right? Things that deserve celebration and feasts and holy days, like those kind of things are what humans live for. It's the meaning of life. We're in a meaning crisis right now. All these people are talking about it on YouTube. We don't have meaning. We don't have identity. Like, who are we? Where do we fit in this cosmos? That's what contemplation gives you. It gives you a place in the cosmos that has purpose and meaning, right? And then we can have all kinds of energy and creativity to do things we could never think of before, that are valuable and good and beneficial, and parts of tradition that we can pass on to the next generation as adding to meaning, right? Think of that as the capital we want. We want to capitalize that, not just energy from like the physical world. We want spiritual health, right? That's what we want. We want meaningfulness. And so I think that, yes, the contemplative aspect of our society is something that we don't value. You can even see it in the way Europe changed from like having no work done on Sundays to, of course, lots of works going on Sundays. That's what that sort of means, right? Is there's a time to make sacred because there's something of higher value to contemplate. Not just, I need to rest so I can go back to work and I can feel better, although it does accomplish that.
It does.
But that's not what it's for. That's not what justifies it. So I think we've lost that element. And Pieper talks about we've become leisure-less, right? Which the old school word for that is one of the 7 deadly vices, right? We're slothful. Not slothful just because we're couch potatoes, and some of us are, but slothful because we're busybodies who can't stop and contemplate, what's this all for? Why am I doing it? Why am I in this rat race?
No,
And so I think you're right. We've lost that. I can see it in myself.
Yeah.
I can't recollect myself as well.
No, it is. Technology is everywhere, and it's hard to. But I do know. I mean, you have a smartphone. You walk in with it. So how do you handle that? Like, what's your advice for adults out there? And then what's your advice for like raising kids? You know, in a technological society where it's in your face all the time. Yeah.
I mean, Postman, at the end of his book, sort of tries to address the question, what do we do about it? Again, he didn't have smartphones and AI and stuff, but still, like, how do we address this problem? Because we were in this state of mind, we have this state of culture. And he talks about becoming what he calls a loving resistance fighter. And he lists all these things we can do individually. Like an individual person can do lots of things, set up habits, get off technologies, go backwards in technology, like to a previous form, right? Do those sorts of things to create discipline, right? And to realize, I don't need this thing. Right? Whenever we feel like we need it, we should really quiz ourselves and say, do I actually need this? Right now, do I need a smartphone? Do I need a computer? I don't think I do need it, but it would be really difficult to get off it. So then I have to count the cost. Yeah. Right? And I think we should be willing to start counting the cost. Like, I mean, Christ gives us the clearest example. Like, if your right hand causes you to sin, then you should cut it off, right? If your eyeball, like gouge it out. I mean, it's obviously Jewish hyperbole, but like the point is what are you willing to do to sacrifice for a greater good? And so I think we need to say, what are those greater goods? How could I sacrifice them? Learn about how technology can limit you from that, and then start becoming more and more disciplined. Yeah. So I think it's really good for like parents to not let their kids have phones for a long time, and they don't need it. Right now, it comes to a point where they're interacting with other kids, right? And of course, socialization is really important. And so you want your kid to understand phones and what they're like and what they're for and all that, but you don't want them to be habituated to it. Right. So you can still show them it. You can still have times where they look at it. Think of Carlo Acutis, right? So I think that discipline and the virtue of temperance is like, number one starting point. Right? But then I think that's all from an individual point of view. I think what we really need to do is the exact opposite of what technopolies do. Technopolies breaking down our social order. What we need to do is together build social order. So you know what? I don't need this device to go do this fun thing, because you know what? I don't need to push play on a music thing. I can go down to the Chesterton Lounge and listen to jazz. Okay. Right? Or like I'm doing something with friends and people, real people together. And so I think whenever you want it, especially entertainment, if you can do it personally and not impersonally, right? And then I think when it comes to building social networks of friendship, like let's do a business together downtown, right? Let's invest in a local project, right? Let's get involved in local politics with people, faces, right? So I think that's the antidote, like socially. And to me, that creates a lot more power and energy, contrary to technopoly, than just my individual efforts to try to fight this beast. And then if we're there, I think the great advantage of being Catholic is that, or Christian more broadly, is that God is provident. God's in control of like destiny. Yeah. It's not my response. The future state of the world is not my responsibility.
You don't have to fix the technopoly.
No, I don't have to fix technopoly. I have to have good relationships here in my local parish, right? My friends, my relatives. I have plenty of responsibilities right here, and I don't even do those very good, right? And then God will take care of the bigger picture, right? And I'm not advising people to simply, retreat into to tiny communities, although I'd say do that too, right? There's people that have ambitions, and you can work up in politics or big companies, or that's not wrong, right? I think we're in a battle, right? We're in a battle, like not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual powers and principalities. So go battle, right? Go battle for the good, right? And by social engagement. Yeah. So I think that's really the antidote.
Yeah, that's great. It seems like technology often masks that. We're not even aware you're in a battle, because it just sort of lulls you to sleep. And
it's very dangerous. And I think studying the history, that's something Postman really emphasizes. Look at the history of your subject, whatever it is in school, but technology is a really important one. Look at the history, and then you'll start to see the philosophers of technology. We're not all like crazy nuts, right? It's more like we're kind of like prophetic, right? Where it's like, these guys said this before AI. Like Lewis wrote That Hideous Strength before there was AI, right? Before there was That Hideous Strength. Yeah, exactly. And so it's like these science fiction writers, they saw the trajectory. They're not crazy. They're prophetic. Yeah. And it's come more and more true as we've gone closer and closer to like AI's development and people's literally naming them after demons. I've met people that have worked with AI. They name them legion and other words for then they think it's funny.
Yeah.
But I think they might actually be
beyond
not
something.
actually. I do think they're flirting with demonic
Yeah.
activity. And when you get into some real dark things that AI and robots are doing, then it's obvious.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
yeah.
it's not, I'm not just a doomsayer, right? I think there's really some serious problems. But my response is attitude, we should have St. Francis's attitude. Like, yeah, the world might be falling apart, but I'm a joyful disciple. Like
Yeah.
I'm a joyful person because God's in control, and I'm going to do whatever I'm supposed to do with my personal calling and my life right now.
That's great. Yeah. No, and I encourage people that are listening, to check out the Catholic Studies program at Franciscan. There's a lot of great courses in there. I know the philosophy of technology is one that, or the technology and society is
Technology
an
and
intelligent
society,
society course there, and I teach a faith and science course in that. It's a really interesting program. It's a lot of diverse people that take that. I really enjoy teaching it because you get to meet a lot of people from
Very
a lot
different
of
people.
different walks of life and learn from them. And so it's a really interesting program. So
And we need Zoom to do it, or some other program
Right, we
like
do
that. So
need-
it's like technology is not evil, right? Because that ultimately is you're developing a relationship, and I'm going to get to meet them at graduation, some of them, right?
Right.
And we all want to see each other personally,
Yeah.
and I do get to see their faces, and that's better than
Right, exactly.
than not having this program.
yeah, exactly. Well, Alex, thanks for being on. We could go on for
could.
hours.
I know we will later.
Yeah, so we will for sure. So thanks for joining us, and I appreciate all your insights on the philosophy of technology and sort of your ideas of where it's going and why it got here.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me. It was really fun.